Hey everybody, welcome to Acrylics Made Easy. Today we're going to paint a desert sunset. Alright, let's go. Over on our palette we've got golden fluid acrylics, Hansa yellow, vat orange, quinacridone magenta, ultramarine blue, Payne's gray, burnt umber light, and titanium white. Let's start this painting with a little sketch. I'm going to get some white paint and a little hint of that vat orange. Get a nice light color here to just sketch out our composition. Alright, we're going to have a lot of sky, and then the ground, the horizon, going to be pretty low. So I'm going to go just a few inches up from the bottom, give just sort of a rough idea of some distant mountains. I want a little bit of bright sky and then a bank of really sort of saturated clouds coming across. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of space here for the very bright yellow light part of the sky, and then we're going to do some like really intense saturated colored clouds there, and then we'll have a little bit of blue sky peeking above. Alright, so this is about all I need to get started, just to give myself a sense of where the major sort of sections of the painting are going to be. You know, sky, land, big cloud, open sky. That's all we need to get started. So let's go ahead and get some color on there. Give this little filbert brush a quick rinse and set it aside. We need something bigger to start filling in. I think I'm going to use this 1-inch flat brush, and we'll start with the brightest part of the sky. Get a little bit of yellow and white together here. And let's just go ahead and start by filling in that open space between our mountain ridges and this big bank of clouds coming across. Just start with that nice light color. We can mix some other tones into it. Now, acrylic paint does dry very fast, but if you put one color on there, you can mix another color into it pretty well if you do it right away. Now, oil paint, obviously, you have all the time in the world. But of course, that can pose other problems. So, here we are. We got that space filled in. Now let's play around with that color a little bit. Let's get a little orange on the brush. So just some Hansa yellow and a little bit of that vat orange. We'll start really light first. And let's just sort of go around. I want the brightest part of the sunset, the lightest part, to be kind of right in the center of this area. So I'm going to go around sort of right in between these mountain ridges, right along those mountain ridges, and darken that part a little bit with that orange. And then I'll come up here and add a little bit across the top. And again, since that paint has just been applied, that light white and yellow has just been applied, I can blend into it. Just a couple of soft brush strokes. I don't want to get rid of the brightness that's right there in the center, so I want to be careful not to overblend. But I do like sort of softening up those edges. One of the problems people have with painting clouds in general is too many sharp edges. So you do want a few sharp edges here and there to kind of just keep things interesting. But a lot of clouds, you just want that vaporous light edge. So I think that's going to work for that section right there. Since we have the orange on our brush already, let's just start into this bank of clouds here that's going to have some really beautiful, intense color. Just going to get some vat orange on its own. Okay? It's a really bright, beautiful orange. And we're going to start out our bank of clouds here with just that orange. I'll leave some space here, and I want to keep these edges somewhat loose. Okay, so I'm going to kind of come over them again and just do a light blend. Sometimes you don't want to blend two colors together into a really smooth overall blend, but sometimes you just want to get some of those sharp edges to go away. So you can just do like a little light blending. Might add just a little bit of that down here in these valleys between the mountains, just to kind of balance that out. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Now, let's go right up into that bank of clouds. We're going to turn it magenta. One of my favorite colors is this quinacridone magenta. So I'm going to clean some of the orange out of this brush, get a little bit of white over here, and some of that quinacridone magenta, one of my favorites all time. Let's put some of that in this sunset here. Oh yeah, it's a nice color. So I want to leave the top edge a little bit loose like that. And where the orange meets the quinacridone magenta, I do want this to be a really smooth blend. So I'm going to go ahead and just work across that edge where the two colors meet. And you want to go right in the same spot where the two colors meet a few times to get that hard edge to go away. And then generally I think it's good to go a little bit low and a little bit high above that spot. And then you end up with a pretty smooth overall blend. That's looking pretty good. And we're going to get even darker into sort of a purpley blue tone at the top of those clouds. So this time I don't need to wash out the brush because, like I said, we're going to make a purple color, and magenta is one part of that. Get a little bit of ultramarine blue over here. Mix a really nice purple with that magenta. Let's get a little bit more blue, something like that. Should work nicely. And I'm going to fill in the top of this little section. And once I get it filled in, I'll do a little blend down into the magenta. Just a few long strokes to sort of get those colors a little smoothly blended. And then at the top of this, I just really want to keep my edges loose. So I'm just going to sort of break up the line. Okay? Again, just try not to have too hard of an edge on the outside of my cloud bank there, because that just starts getting things looking a little cartoonish when the edge is just too sharp. I'm going to bring the clouds just up a little bit here into this space. I want to leave some space for a nice bit of blue sky at the top, but I don't like that sort of too straight of an edge at the top of the clouds, so I'm adding these little broken up clouds there. Let's get back to our palette, get a little bit more blue, just a hint of white, and just finish off the top of these clouds. So I'm just putting that right into that purpley color that we already had on there. So again, I want to keep all these edges pretty loose. And just get a little bit at the very top of this big bank of clouds here. Alright, I think that's pretty good. Let's go ahead and do this bit of bright blue sky up here. So with this brush, a little bit of a rinse, a little bit of a wipe. Get it pretty clean this time because I want a nice bright color. It's going to be mostly white. Just a very small hint of ultramarine blue. I think that'll work pretty good. Let's throw that on our canvas. Oops, got a little drip. Okay, so we're filling in that space with this very light blue tone, and as I fill it in, I'm going to go ahead and just sort of work that blue, that light blue, into the edges of these clouds a little bit. Just push down with the brush, kind of scrub out some of the harder edges. This is something you only really have a little window of time to do. But if you do it right away, again, acrylics can blend. So I'm just going to just very lightly sort of play with the edges of these clouds up here. I don't want them to be too solid, but I also don't want to like get rid of them, right? So I'm not going to cover them up. I think that's pretty good. I might get a little bit bluer. It's such a pale blue right now. I think I want a little bit more intense. So I'm going to get just a little bit more ultramarine blue over here. Get that a shade stronger color and just work down from the top. So just adding it right here at the top. I want to keep it bright. Down below, but adding that little bit more intense blue at the top, I think should nicely finish off our sky. All right, very nice. Now, one thing I'm seeing when I look at this sky is that this big bank of clouds is just a little too solid for me. So I'm going to break it up just a bit. Now, one of my favorite things about painting is you can go any direction with it. So if you put something on there in the foreground and you think, oh, it's too big, then you can just mix up that background color and cut back at it. So I'm going to mix up some of that background sky color, this very light white and ultramarine blue mix. And if I don't want this cloud quite as big, if I want to just kind of break it up a little bit, I can cut into it with that sky color, you know? And it doesn't have to be sort of, I don't know, the intuitive thing is to paint the sky and then paint the clouds on top, which, you know, that often works great. But sometimes you need a little bit of sky where you have a cloud, and you can just do that with paint. I think it's such a beautiful and amazing thing. It makes it such a forgiving medium that you can, you know, paint the sky, paint the clouds, paint some sky. You can come back and forth. I mean, sometimes that becomes problematic because you go back and forth too many times and kind of overwork a painting. But I think it's just so nice to have that out, you know, to say, okay, I'm painting this big bank of clouds, but if it's too thick, if it's too big, well, I can come back in with my sky color and break it up here or there, you know? Do a little bit of finger painting here. Sometimes I just like to use my fingertip to blend out a brush stroke here or there. Nothing wrong with that as long as you don't pick up a sandwich and start eating it without washing your hands. All right, I think that's really good for a sky. So let's start working on the distant mountains, and then we'll get into our sort of foreground desert. So first of all, the distant mountains. Those are going to be a nice sort of magenta and purple. So I'm just going to get some of this light color out of here, mix up a new color with this magenta and blue. I think that's a good color to start. Let's use that. So I've already got sort of these shapes worked out. I'm just going to go ahead and paint them in. I want to leave some nice sharp little peaks here and there. All along the top, and then along the bottom of that, I'm just going to sort of blend it out. So making sure that top edge is pretty sharp. And I want the bottom to just blend out. We're going to put another layer of hills in front of these. So those are our furthest distant mountains right there. We'll get a little darker. Just a little bit more blue, a little bit more magenta. Ooh, that's a nice color right there. Let's use that. And I like to sort of make sure that in a place or two, the peak sort of crosses over the ridge line of the one behind. Just keeps the composition a little bit more interesting to have that interplay between the edges. And maybe add a little bit more of that dark color to my brush, just to make sure this mountain is a little bit bolder. And I'm going to cross over that edge a little bit more here. So looking pretty good. All right. That would do pretty well, I think, for some distant mountains. Let's go ahead and fill in what's going to be our dark evening desert right there. So I'm going to start with a real dark mix. I'm going to get this brush a little bit cleaned out and get some of that burnt umber. That's burnt umber light and a little bit of Payne's gray. Make this real dark brownish gray color. Let's use that. So I want it to come up the canvas maybe 2 or 3 inches or so. So I'll just start at the bottom and then work it up a little bit. I don't want to get rid of any of these beautiful hills we painted in the background, so just kind of go up to about there, I think should work nicely. Okay, now we want to start adding some texture in the foreground. So I think I'm going to switch brushes. This brush has done us well for filling all this stuff in, but we're going to retire it for this painting, so give it a little bit of a rinse. And set that one aside. And so for some texture, let's get a filbert brush out. Love a filbert. This is the number 6 filbert. And I want to get real dark first for some sort of bushes. So mostly Payne's gray with a little bit of that burnt umber. Just getting a little darker than the background color we just laid on there. And I also want to get rid of this just straight line I've got going across there. So using this filbert brush, kind of laying it almost flat against the canvas, I'm just going to start creating some bushes. Just some loose, you know, they're almost, I guess if you had to squint, they're almost oval shaped. But I definitely don't want them to be smooth like that, so I just keep them broken up. And I also want to make sure I have different sizes to these things, so I don't want a whole bunch of exactly the same shape bushes. So some of them will be a little bit bigger, kind of cross up into that background mountain a little bit. Some of them will just be right along that line. You know, you can do some real small ones kind of in between. And also letting some of that brown color that we laid on there, that dark brownish grayish color, I want to let some of that show through. That's just going to be sort of the sand of the desert floor. So we want to put a little bit more this dark tone on there. And as we work our way down the canvas, make some of these bushes a little bit bigger. All right, because they're closer to us. You know, there's all sorts of things you can use, tools and techniques to make depth in your painting, to create depth. One of them is having the objects that are lower down on the canvas, when it's the same thing as something else in the canvas that's supposed to be further away, you just make it bigger as it gets towards the bottom of the canvas, and automatically these ones that are above are just going to get pushed back into the distance. Okay, one of the other things is there's always more detail, more texture in that area right closest to you. So we're going to make sure that we do that in this painting, that we have more detail, more texture, and just, like I said, these bushes are going to get bigger. Make sure I kind of break up the space and make them kind of different sizes. And then we can start kind of working on some texture. All right, those are some nice sort of basic shapes for all these bushes. Let's get a little bit of texture going. Give this brush a little rinse. And let's get some of that burnt umber and mix it with a little tiny bit of white. A little bit of blue in there doesn't hurt anything. Something like that. And what I want to do is give these bushes a sense that there's light coming from behind them. And the easiest way to do that is to just put a little bit of a light edge around the outside of them. They're going to be backlit is the word. So there's a little bit of some light coming from behind. The center of the bush is dark. The thickest part, because it's blocking all that light that's coming from behind. But that outer edge has a little bit of brightness to it. So I'm just going to keep adding a little bit more of this burnt umber and white mix that has just a hint of blue. Keep things nice and cool. And just come across some of these edges. You don't need a highlight on every edge. Keep adding paint to it. Get a little bit more on there. You don't need a highlight on every edge, but if you have them, you know, a few different places, then your brain will just fill in the rest of the information. It'll say, oh yeah, there's highlights out there. There's light coming from behind. All right. I think those bushes are looking pretty decent for now. Let's just play around with a little bit more of the texture. We have a little bit of highlight on the very top. Let's just sort of take this filbert brush, hold it vertically, and play around. Maybe just pull out some little branches. Just on these ones that are closest to us. Just throw a few highlights on there. And since that black paint is still wet, you can kind of drag it around. Play around with that a little bit too. Oh, I think those are looking like some nice little bushes. Beautiful. Okay, so it's a desert sunset. What are we missing? A couple of cactuses, of course. Let's get over to our palette. Give that brush a little rinse. Get real dark and bold for this cactus. It's going to be Payne's Gray and Burnt Umber. Just going to use this filbert brush again. Love a filbert. Now, quick little mention about the rule of thirds. And when you're looking to place something in a painting and you can't figure out exactly where you want to put it, do I want to put it in the middle, at the edge? Where should I put this thing? So I want to put a cactus on here. Now, there's just something magical about when you find 1/3 of the way across the canvas from either edge. Works the same way vertically. So our horizon of mountains here is about 1/3 of the way up from the bottom of the canvas, and there's just something pleasing about that proportion that just works. So as I place this cactus on here, I'm going to find where I think about 1/3 of the way is. I'm not going to measure it, but sort of eyeball it. So it's not in the center, not too close to the edge, about 1/3 of the way in. And I just want to start also about 1/3 of the way down from the top of the canvas. You know, your eye is sort of magically drawn to that point. There's 4 points, you know, where you're like 1/3 of the way across and 1/3 of the way down on either side, and then 1/3 of the way up and 1/3 of the way across on either side. There's these 4 little magic points where if you have a detail that you want to put on your painting, that you want it to be kind of like a focal point in your painting, if you put that, you know, top of the cactus right at that point, it just looks right. And a lot of times, you know, it's hard to find the right place to put something. So it's not a rule. There's plenty of paintings that look great where the focal point is in the center or over on the edge somewhere. There's no actual rule. One of the great things about art in general, you know, I always love the saying, there are no rules, only tools. So it's just one of those things that you can use when you're laying out your composition and you're thinking, where should I put this thing? Try it out. Try putting it 1/3 of the way across your canvas. And maybe put the edge of something or a very focal point. You know, you might have a character, a person standing in a painting, put their eyes right there, 1/3 of the way across and 1/3 of the way down. And it'll look right, I tell you what. So I want to make sure I have this silhouette real nice and dark, so I'm just making sure to lay on the paint a little bit extra thick. It's fluid acrylic, so it does just lay on thin naturally, but you can go over it a couple times if you need to. Get it a little bit bolder. All right, I think that cactus is looking pretty good. Can be a little bit more solid right there. One thing I do when I want to lay on the paint a little bit extra thick is, again, I lay the paintbrush more flat against the canvas. When you press on it and you hold it perpendicular to the canvas, you can't help but just push it and spread it and get it all thin. But if you have your paintbrush loaded with paint and you just lay it on there, I tell you what, you can get a real bold brush stroke that way. Okay, so this cactus looks great, just needs a couple of little friends out there. So let's do another one a little bit further in the distance. All right, a little bit smaller because it's further in the distance, and it's also going to start a little higher up. The base of it's going to be a little higher up. Try to make sure it's just a little bit different shape. So one of the hardest things that you'll come across when you try to paint landscapes is that there's a tendency to paint every cactus the same shape, every tree the same shape, whatever element you're working with, we want to make a pattern out of it. But you have to fight that. So even as I put this third cactus, I don't want the space between them to be exactly the same. So I'm going to put this third cactus way over toward the edge and make it smaller. All right, now that's pretty good. I think we're going to call that good for the cactuses. I just want a little bit more of this horizon line sort of broken up, so I'm just going to put some little bushes that stick up into that space. Maybe one over here that's a little bit taller, just right toward the edge. Okay, I don't want to get too crazy with all that. I love the color that we have in the background. And one of the hardest things to do when you're painting is to figure out, when do I stop? When do I put down the brush? But I think for this painting right now, we've reached that point. Okay, you can play around with it forever. Doesn't necessarily make it better. More is not always better. This cactus looks good. All these cactuses look good. Cacti, sorry. Love the colors in the background. Loving these big, bold bushes that we have on there that have their own individual shapes to them. Again, you could keep playing around with it forever, but I think we're going to call this done. So there you go, folks. I hope you had a good time painting the desert sunset with me. Make sure to like and subscribe. Acrylics Made Easy, and we will paint a whole lot more soon. Thanks, folks.